r/NoSleep. Posted by you/Lady of Hell. The Midnight Train, Part 15, Parasite. My name is Evelyn and I am a passenger of the Midnight Train. Last time, I had a run-in with the bandaged girl and Amy and I saved the man with a briefcase's life. Today's update will include revelations, battle plans and a tragedy. Let's start in the early morning, right after I woke up. My dreams were electric. They slithered and squirmed, shadows twisted in shadows, my body shattered over and over again and its pieces fell into a web of wires, only to be devoured by the ever-present humming. I was sick when I woke up. After way too long, the nausea finally faded and I sat up to get myself some water when I noticed Amy, sitting on the bed and staring. I had spent the night on the floor, so Amy could sleep in the bed. I had figured she needed the rest more than me. She didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even seem to breathe, just sat like a statue and stared at the wall. I turned on the lights, but she didn't react. A fly buzzed around her head and for a moment I just watched it as it landed directly in her eye. Amy still didn't blink. The most horrible thought crossed my mind. No, fuck. I dropped to my knees in front of her, clutched her shoulders and dug my fingers deep into her skin. Amy. Hey, girlie, you can't just die here. Fuck. Come on, wake up, okay? And just like that, after several agonizing seconds, she snapped out of her trance, blinked a few times and looked at me in confusion. Eve? What's wrong? Oh thank God. Relieved, I pulled her into a tight hug. You looked like you were dead. Were you asleep or what? I guess, she replied, more question than answer. When I let go of her again, I noticed a dark speck right under her left eye. A tiny patch of mold, no longer contained to her reflection but visible in the real world now. I quickly raised my hand and brushed it off. Bit of dirt, I explained as she gave me a questioning look. How are you, Amy? Fine, I guess. I feel awake. That stuff yesterday, the dining wagon and the man with the briefcase, that felt exciting. I slept for weeks, Eve, and I'm finally awake again. The last words were spoken with a smile, as if all these horrors were merely an adventure to her. As if I couldn't have died yesterday. The wounds in my cheek were already scarred, the pain was gone but I was still hyper-aware of them. Why did you come back? I asked. You survived. You managed to get out and then you entered again. Why? She shrugged. I don't know, honestly. There was no incident, if that's what you think. No tragedy, no real reason. For several weeks, I just went back to the station and watched the train depart and at some random night, I crossed the threshold. I was aware of what I was doing. I knew I don't have a ticket, I won't make it out again. And I still did it. Didn't even regret it. Lily was there and that was all that mattered back then. And after that? Did you just barricade in your compartment until I showed up? She shook her head. No, at first everything was fine. I met with old friends, spent time among the passengers. She trailed off, stared into space again. I went outside once. I guess that's when everything went to shit. I raised an eyebrow. Leaving the train for a little trip never seemed to be a good idea, at least according to Amy's tales. But that one must have really gone south if even I went through a haunted hospital to save my fake girlfriend called it that. The memory's hazy. It was shortly after I came back and I went with Lily and the detective. The detective? I interrupted. Yeah, he always kind of stuck with me whenever he found me with Lily. Guess he wanted to save me from her or something, I honestly don't know. I never asked and he never explained. She looked down at her hands, her fingers fidgeting with the rim of her sweater. A nervous smile played around her lips. Anyways, we went outside. All three of us. It was a weird place, but I guess you already figured as much. I just nodded, waiting for her to continue. There was water, she explained after a brief moment of silence. It was freezing cold and there was water on the road. Didn't look deep. A puddle, nothing more. I stepped in and I fell. It didn't have a bottom, there was just endless water and darkness. It was so vast I couldn't really comprehend it. That's where my memory gets cloudy. I remember seaweed wrapping around my body and then something must have attacked me. There was some bright pain and then the next thing I knew was the detective, carrying me back to the surface. She sighed. That's when Lily locked me in the compartment. She said she was worried something would happen again, but we both know that's bullshit. The detective seems to have a pattern, I said because I really didn't know what else to say about her story. Just hearing about this impossible ocean was enough to make me shiver. Always shows up to help when the damage is done, but never preventing it. Maybe that's his purpose? She suggested. I sighed and leaned my head against the wall. Inhumans are weird. We fell silent after that. I thought about her story for a while, but it seemed to have happened before the train had taken ill, and so I disregarded it quickly. The last rule, no, another rule that was no longer in place, was explained with this. I knew everything about the inhabitants of Compartment 3 now. There were more important matters than that. We spent a while resting, had our disgusting breakfast from the vending machines, and then, a few hours later, we sat in one of the common wagons with the detective and the man with the briefcase. I still couldn't believe we were actually teaming up with two Inhumans, especially something as powerful as the man with the briefcase. They were the best chance we had, maybe even the only chance, and it still felt like we were making a terrible mistake. Voluntarily staying in the presence of something that could kill me without effort never seemed like a good idea. We sat in a group of 4 seats, myself next to the detective while Amy stayed close to the man with the briefcase. She asked him 3 times if he was feeling alright, if he recovered from yesterday, if his wounds were healed, and he reassured her 3 times that he was perfectly fine. I still didn't pay too much attention to the relationship, just wondered why Amy had a tendency to cling to Inhumans for comfort. Alright, let's summarize, shall we? I said, catching the attention of my 3 companions. The midnight train suffers from some sort of disease. It infects the train itself and the inhabitants, and I'm just shooting in the dark here and guess one of the symptoms are the wires that took over one of the wagons. Did I get this right so far? Indeed, the man with the briefcase agreed. Okay, cool, thanks. And it started after Amy came back here. Also correct? Again, the man with the briefcase confirmed my statement. I nodded. Great. Now, did the first symptom appear after stopping at some place? Not immediately. It was the detective who answered this time. Eve, where are you going with these questions? Amy asked. I actually had thought that to be obvious by now. Alright, I'll tell you guys my theory and you tell me why I'm wrong. This thing, whatever it is, tries to take over the midnight train. I think it's a parasite. It came aboard at some stop to find a new host and it chose the train. The train reacts like a living organism, with fever and stuff, that's why you guys call it a sickness. So can someone please tell me that's bullshit? I looked at each of them. Because from what I heard, parasites are really nasty. I fear your explanation makes perfect sense, Evelyn, the man with the briefcase said. But you don't know for certain. I leaned forward, resting my arms on my eyes, and looked at him. With all due respect, sir, why don't you know? You are very close to the train, why can't you find the source of the parasite? He just stared back at me with utter indifference. Because I can't, Evelyn. At this point, I was pretty sure these entities would drive me insane sooner or later. I hated dealing with them, I despised it, and if I had any chance to go home without getting rid of the parasite first, I would just take Amy and leave all of them to rot here. Alright, Inhuman rules and stuff, sorry I asked, I replied exasperated, leaning back in my seat again. So we agree on the parasite thing? They all nodded. Now we need to find the original host, the detective said. Any ideas, kid? Suddenly, Amy went pale and tensed. What if it's me? She whispered. It started after I came back, right? I'm sick, I have this fever and the midnight train tried to trap me in my compartment. What if I brought the parasite in? Tears filled her eyes. What if I'm patient zero? I would lie if I said the thought hadn't crossed my mind. There was a second theory which seemed a bit more likely to me, but all Amy said right now I had already thought last night, when I lay awake after the nightmares. I had spent a lot of time thinking. Contemplating what I was going to do if she really turned out to be the host. Because one thing was clear as day to me, the shadow thing I had encountered on my first day was the parasite's current host, and without getting rid of it, the parasite would stay. Actually, the encounter with the shadow thing was the single thing that seemed to disprove my theory about Amy, but the train's general weirdness could just as well be an explanation. Either way, I hadn't come to any conclusion. I could be a bit of an asshole, but I wasn't a killer. The parasite is anorganic, the man with the briefcase said to her. Your condition isn't. It is not you, Nikki. She visibly relaxed and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Do you know what it is? My condition, I mean, she asked. Yes. He didn't elaborate any further. For a few seconds, they stared at each other, until Amy nodded. Thank you anyways, sir. That, of course, left the question of what the hell was up with Amy then. The parasite was indeed anorganic, all wires and electricity, And so was the sickness the other inhabitants suffered. I had seen the wires under the man with the briefcase's skin, although I had thought them to be worms at first. The fact that Amy was rotting away should have concerned me way more than it did at that moment, but I solely focused on the parasite. Though she wasn't infected with it, I still held on to the belief that she would be fine as soon as she left the midnight train with me. "Wanna hear my theory then?" I asked my little group. "I think it's the bandaged girl." "How so?" the detective replied. "It has to be one of the new guys, right? We just agreed it's not Amy, and I thanked every deity for that fact, and I don't think it's the Phoenix. The wagon with the wires was cold, it doesn't fit him. I admit, I don't know shit about the doll and chains, so I guess that's also possible, but the bandaged girl makes the most sense. I met her in the overgrown wagon, why should she hang out there if the wires would bother her?" "You, sir," said the parasite, "is anorganic and that little bitch, sorry, is soaked in acid." I touched the 4 scarred circles on my cheek. Plus, wannabe Samara asked me for help, so I guess she doesn't like to play the host either. What do you think? "That's a solid theory, kid," the detective said. "But getting rid of entities isn't easy." "Yeah? Seems like a lot of them have disappeared since Amy's first ride." "It was a time of change," the man with the briefcase explained. "We asked the doll," Amy suggested and smiled, looking incredibly pleased with her idea. "The rules say she knows things, right? Even I go and ask her tonight, and if that doesn't help, we can still go to the blind beggar woman." We all nodded. "Good idea, Amy," I told her sincerely. "It's decided then. Amy and I talk to the doll and we all meet here again tomorrow morning. Any objections?" Nobody said anything. "Okay, amazing. Then." "Sir, can I ask you something?" Amy interrupted me, looking at the man with the briefcase. He nodded. "Why did the Phoenix attack you yesterday?" His expression changed, turning into the icy glare he had shown yesterday, when he had faced the Phoenix. "It is the nature of things to form a hierarchy, Nikki," he explained. "And predators know what weakness looks like." She stared at him, her eyes widened with shock, and grabbed his arm. "We won't let this happen, sir," she promised quickly. "Never." He just thanked her. That was it. I thanked both men for their help and we parted ways, this time with concrete battle plans in mind. We walked down the hallway. I had one arm wrapped around Amy's waist since she was too weak to walk on her own right now. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Back to the compartment. You need to rest." "Bullshit," she hissed. "Can't we just walk around for a while? I want to see the rest of the train. We could go to the balcony or something." I stopped. "And what if we run into something? The Phoenix? The children? The fucking parasite? You can't even walk, Amy, holy shit. So you're going to lock me away? Great, it's not like I've been through this shit already." "Oh, you don't compare me to your Annie Wilkes." I grabbed her arm. "Hard. Contrary to that crazy bitch, I'm trying to get you out of here, remember? Or do you rather stay? Hang out with your monster friends a little? You're going to die, Amy, you look like a walking corpse already. What do you expect to happen? Your death isn't an if, it's a when." She looked up to me and blinked, but that didn't stop the tears from falling. "I think I'm losing my mind, Eve," she whispered, her voice trembling, and then she started to sob. "Hey, it's okay," I reassured her softly, letting go off her arm and pulling her into a hug. "I'm sorry. Shouldn't have screamed at you, honey. I don't want to die." She held onto me for dear life, fingers dug deep into the fabric of my jacket. Her skin was burning hot against mine, the fever had to be even higher than before, and I just knew I had to get her off this train quickly or she would die from whatever disease she had. "You won't. I won't let you," I promised her, and while she still lay in my arms, I brushed another patch of mold from the back of her neck. "Hey, how about that? We'll go to the compartment, you lie down for a few hours and then we'll go around and explore a bit before we talk to the doll? Deal?" She brought a little more distance between us and smiled brightly. "Deal." Afraid to lose her mind, she had said. I agreed with her. She was way too eager to interact with the train's monsters, while I preferred to keep my distance. Although she was fatally sick, she always seemed to want more, to throw herself into one nightmare after another. The man with the briefcase's words about familiarity and recklessness remained true once more. I was worried it was going to get her killed rather soon. We made our way back towards the compartment and I noticed again how the atmosphere was off. The lights were getting darker each day and the humming was getting louder. Something in the air made my body tense. Electricity, like the second before a lightning strike. I pulled Amy a little closer and shoved my free hand into my pocket, where I had stored my knife. Just in case. We crossed over to the next wagon and the first thing I noticed were the flickering lights. Amy stared up at the ceiling in horror, raised a shaking hand and pointed at the light bulbs. "It's the dark beast," she whispered, terrified like I had never seen her before. "We have to run." I shook my head, looking away from her to stare at the gruesome scene she had yet to notice. "It's not the dark beast, Amy," I replied, my voice sounding hollow. There were 4 hunters and 4 dogs, several meters in front of us. The hunters were dressed in blood-stained leather, the exposed flesh was nothing but raw veins and muscle and sinew. The eyes were empty sockets, staring into nowhere, and the dogs were skinned and eyeless too. And wires, hundreds of squirming, slithering wires pierced their bodies. They were black as night and alive with electricity, moving ever so slightly. They had forced their way through limbs and chests and necks and skulls, holding the corpses tight in place. And the wires breached out, climbed over the interior and clung to the walls, slowly spreading through the entire wagon. And for just the fraction of a second, I saw the shadow thing at the far end of the wagon and watched its wires dance around its frame, before Amy's ear-piercing scream grabbed my attention. I just reacted fast enough to catch the girl as she fainted. When I looked up again, the shadow thing was gone. The parasite was growing bolder, I thought grimly, and I also thought about the overgrown wagon and how close I had gotten to the wires that had killed the hunters. Still, I forced myself to ignore the terror I felt at this moment to take care of my friend, who lay unconscious on the floor, looking nothing but dead in the flickering light. Now that's a perfect moment to end this update. I told you shit was getting real now, didn't I? Next time, we will finally meet the doll in chains and, well, someone gets injured. But more on that tomorrow. Until then, be careful with your alliances. And even more careful with your friends.